Tom Nevins has been in Japan for 15 years. He's a graduate of the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. He came to Japan first as a researcher in that field, and subsequently, in fact, in 1978, established his own consulting firm, consulting in the field of industrial relations in Japan. And also, as many of us know, he's in the headhunting business. He's former chairman of Employment Practices Committee, and that's in his favor. He's also, incidentally, a former member of the Board of Governors of the American Chamber of Commerce. He's written, as I'm sure you're all aware, many, many articles on the subject of industrial and labor relations in Japan. Has authored a very famous book, and is well versed to speak on this subject, and I'm pleased to introduce Tom Nevins, our speaker. Tom?
Where we grew up, I think, if we're American, if we went to a top university or even not a great university, if we were basically white-collar type people with ties, we were never in the union, right, generally. I mean, the only growth in the American labor market now is in white-collar unionism, but still, it's not much, right? We weren't union members. We were not paid overtime. But here in Japan, those young men, in large companies only, overtime is payable to them, okay? So it's not such a mystery that when you drive down the highway there and you look out, you'll see so many firms with their lights on. They're making 10 to 15% increased premium on their base salaries, or sorry, on their normal guaranteed regular cash compensation. Now, they're not getting all the hours that they register by any means. They're getting generally maybe a third, depending on how long they stay. Why do they stay? If you think about it, their houses were always small, especially the bachelors now in a small apartment, right? The office is heated. Their buddies are there. You know, if they want to go out drinking, you can't go out on your own. You go out together, that sort of thing. Traditionally, you can't leave unless your boss leaves. Until he says "osaki ni" and he leaves, really, you know, the subordinates don't leave in a good Japanese company. So the boss, that's a good excuse for the boss to leave earlier. And in fact, he usually does that, and he's willing to do it. For one reason, he's no longer paid overtime when he reaches kanrishoku level or a manager level, which in some companies is kacho hosa, assistant section chief, or kacho, generally between age 38 to 42 or 43. That's why, sorry, did I do that to you? Sorry. That's why the yakuzuki teate, or the position allowance, becomes payable, because that's a way to compensate for the now lack of being paid overtime. So that's why they bring in the kacho allowance. In your firms, you don't necessarily need that, okay? I mean, in small firms in Japan, they don't pay overtime, basically. Small firms meaning maybe below 500 employees. in your firms, generally, there are very few people that really would need to be paid overtime, right? And in labor relations, obviously, you can do anything you want to do, basically, as long as no one complains, right? So the fact is, salesmen, there'd be no reason to pay it. The labor standards law backs you up. Even people doing confidential work, executive secretaries, you can define a certain salary level. No reason to pay overtime above that. The company union now, what we have is the dues being directly paid into a Kigyo or an enterprise union, right? Not to an upper body union. So the rich unit is the enterprise union, but still not rich enough to sustain a long-term economic strike, right? So what do you have in Japan? You don't have a strike out, you have a strike in, basically, okay? In other words, they try and embarrass management. If they don't show up at work at all, they don't get their pay cut. What do you do in a foreign firm when you're bothered by, troubled by this kind of partial strike? Actually, in America, it's called sabotage. It's against the law. Here, what you have to do as the employer is, pick the amount. In other words, he's down by this much productivity, cut the pay back by that much. That tends to eliminate collective action, okay? You've got to have control. You've got to manage that out. I don't want to get too carried away with what I really do to earn a living here, but, if you lose a job in a Japanese company, you lose your union membership, essentially, right? Because there's very little of this direct affiliation to the upper body union with the union hiring hall. You lose your job, you've lost your security, and that's another reason why people try and keep their nose clean and stay in one place. But I should say that, we've always got to make this distinction between the large firms, the major employers, and the smaller companies, okay? Because lifetime employment, the three pillars, they say, of Japanese labor relations, lifetime employment, seniority, wages, enterprise unions, they do not apply to firms essentially with under 1,000 employees. The union organization rate in firms less than 100 is only about 2%. In less than 500, it's only about 4%. Now nationwide, it's 28%. It had a peak of 39.5% in 1946, directly after the war. Why? Why are there enterprise unions in Japan? It's not because of traditional Japanese labor relations. There were no unions. The highest union organization rate was 1932, 7.9%. During the war, they were totally wiped out by, the military-industrial complex. They have them because MacArthur and SCAP essentially said, let us have unions. That's part of the democratization plan. So the easiest place to organize was right there in the company, right? Management was not about to oppose it, was not about to fight it. And so the unions grew up here without going through that baptism of fire. They really can't stand on their own legs, right? And the more you give the union, the way the Japanese company does, they provide the Xerox machine, the office, they pay the officers, right? They're still on the payroll. The more of that you do, really, in one sense, the more subservient the union is. And it really is a company union, but it still has a useful function. It's a useful appendage of the personnel department. Will it work in your firm? No. You're better not having one, okay? Because an employee association can whip around and slap you in the face. You've got to be careful. But you can have a controlled environment. We've got some very successful clients where the company contributes to an association, and so do the employees, and they meet and they have parties, that sort of thing. But you've got to watch out for it. And if you're afraid of unionism, though, and if you want to try and start the right union instead of having the wrong union, be careful. It's tricky business. It's worth taking a look at, though. And unions really aren't that scary if they're managed right. If you manage a union right, management gives unions their power. If you essentially don't make them the center of attention, information, if you don't meet their demands. Huh? Someone comes in and threatens you with a union organization drive. What should you do? You do nothing. You just kind of smile, and you just say, well, listen, I don't really see what a union's going to do for you here. You realize that negotiation, collective bargaining means that we can go back to a zero-based table, right? Things can be taken away. We can make counter demands, right? It shrivels right up and it blows away. Staff reduction. The Japanese companies were making it a last resort. It is true that the 1976 shipping, when they went into the red, they were able to generally pull it off by putting their people into automobile manufacturers. Obviously, no one's going to take them now. It's not going to work. And in fact, Hitachi shut down the 3,500 employees, shut down the whole island. And most of them had no place to go. So Japan is also not infallible. Okay? Even since this film was made, there are some changes here. I personally wouldn't like to see it go too far, because there's a good system here and it's a good potential ally of the United States, and we bring that dollar down too far, you know, I think we can overdo it. But maybe you got some opinions on that. I don't know much about it myself, really. But I don't think Japan should bleed too much either. Some of the things they talked about, like, you know, the 40-year-old man is as good as a woman, right? That was the man over 40 or the woman running in the race. Actually, the Japanese government, you know, many of you, I don't think you know about this, but if you wanted to, and you wanted to take the time and trouble to do it, you could get subsidies every time you hire a man over 40. Mm-hmm. You get subsidies if you hire the handicapped. All right, there are certain quotas that large companies have to meet. And you can also get subsidies if you hire an unemployed worker and you're willing to train them. And I don't know what the rates are now. Labor Pains has figures in it. They're 3 or 4 years old, but probably up to 4,000 or 5,000 yen a day, that sort of thing. I forget all the statistics, excuse me, but if you hire a man over, you know, a middle-aged employee who's unemployed, I think the government handles half his pay for 6 months. That's not a bad deal. Might be worth looking into. Maybe even if you if you headhunt him, I guess you can't do it. He's got to be unemployed, I guess. Okay, can't help you with that. Gang bosses. They talked about the gang bosses. This is the old kumi, the oyakata kokata, the old kumi, which, you know, interesting. If anything was responsible for bringing about enterprise unions the way they are, it was to try and bring in the oyakata kokata, to try and provide something special for that that group, the oyakata kokata group, or the boss with the skilled workers under him. You know, before the war, Japanese management hired and fired at will. They really did not have this kind of lifetime employment, and they didn't have unions, obviously. And you know the differences between the president and the hira, you know, the pepe, the lowest man's salary was maybe, what? I mean, I've seen figures, 110. Just at least worse than the United States is now. And now we only have differences of, at the most, 10 to 11. Okay, but in those days it was 10 times worse. And before the Nisso, this Japan-Russian war, 1903 was it? You know, before that, it was really hard for companies to have control over those labor boss systems, and they moved from factory to factory at will. So the idea was, how can we bring them in? What can we do for them, and to maintain their privileged position, to keep them happy? And so then the idea was, okay, we'll guarantee them lifetime employment, we'll give them seniority wages, and we'll kind of bring in, you know, some contract employees and so on. And I don't think we want to overestimate some of those traditional cultural aspects. I'd say the biggest thing was MacArthur. And, you know, you probably won't read that anywhere. I would say that had to be the biggest factor, because you went from a 0 organization rate to 39.5% in 6 months. Let's see. Yeah, one thing in there about, you know, Brian Taylor and some of our other experts out here can confirm this with me. And anything I say, please disagree if you think it's not right. But it said that the Mitsubishi executives will try and recruit from their own universities, get Mitsubishi people. No, Jinjibu does that. The personnel department does that. I don't think those guys have time to go out to the universities too much, let alone spend much time with their professors. Maybe they meet a professor once in a while, but it's personnel department that does that. The role of the personnel department is larger in Japan. What is it doing? The bucho, the head of it, the division heads are people that really are moved from position to position. Most of your company presidents have been Jinji Bucho. They've been head of the personnel department. Obviously, there have to be career professionals who know how to handle the Social Security payments and, you know, negotiate with the union and work with the salary increase and, you know, handle the payroll. But your key men are only there for about 2 years, okay? They try and be objective on their personnel appraisals, which in fact, they're doing a lot of that. See, in Japan, a Japanese manager or a rank and file isn't going to feel comfortable having only his supervisor evaluating him. He wants the personnel department to basically put the seal on the evaluation, on the form, and personnel's job is to check to see, and by getting cross-reference from another supervisor nearby, and it's not so hard to do because it's the big room, isn't it, right? People are working together. You have a section, in a room this size, you'd have You could have 1 or 2 booths, and you could have maybe anywhere from 4 to 6 cars, 4 to 6 sections with the cluster right there. So everyone looks around, they know. It's easy to get a cross-reference. And furthermore, a beautiful thing about a Japanese company is that you don't have that he's after my job complex. You don't have that threatening aspect, because in the large companies only, right, where you're plugged into basically by promotion, by years of service, a superior, a much brighter subordinate isn't really a threat to the manager, right? If he's smart, he'll partake in his daily career development. He'll benefit from what he can accomplish. Oh yeah, it said on the Nemoashi, no surprises, watch out for surprises. It said something that even the old samurai didn't like that. Maybe that's where it comes from. It must be true. But one mistake that Western managers are always doing, it's led to multiple union organization drives that we've had to solve. It's led to just unnecessary ill will, mistrust. Don't announce things. Don't let the paper fly. Don't send out memos. Get up out of your chair. Go and talk to somebody. Even if he doesn't understand you, it doesn't matter. It's the touch, it's the feel, okay? Do that once in a while. The worse the news is, that's when you have to take all the more time to talk it out, and you cannot possibly risk announcements, okay? Announcements by definition mean you know something that somebody else doesn't know. You're putting yourself in a superior position. The Japanese will, really resent that. And watch your Sujimichi. Talk to the right Japanese at the right time. Get the participation. Get ownership. They're very bad soldiers if they feel things aren't done right. But if it's done within what they deem to be a base of legitimized authority, then they are indeed very good soldiers. It's hard to get that climate. It's harder to get that climate in a foreign firm, but you can work at it, and I think you can do it. But you've got to talk things through. Let's see. We got to have some time for questions too. But just briefly on meishis, one thing. Whenever somebody gives you a meishi, right? You know this, unless you just came here recently, but some of you maybe have. Always give the meishi back. That's why he gives it, and he's giving a piece of himself. Okay, when he gives that meishi to you, and if you don't give it back, it's an insult. Okay, and traditionally it's the more junior man who gives the meishi first. So what you're doing to the senior man is you're also, you're really giving something away. You're saying, hey, well, I'll give the meishi first. And if he feels he's more senior than you are, then not to give the meishi to him is a double punch. So make sure you always give that meishi, and it doesn't matter so much if you handle it the right way and all that. Just make sure you give the thing. Okay. Just keep in mind the difference between those large Japanese companies and the small ones. The small ones have to hire a man to do a job. They cannot go to the universities and hire somebody from April 1st. The professors won't take them seriously. They won't get the best people. And if you believe you have to follow lifetime employment here, even as a multinational, you'll be stuck with dregs for life. Okay? You can't try and pay the Japanese according to bureaucratized career paths. They can't be on paid by years of service or by seniority, just as they are not in a small Japanese employer, right? The kacho could be older than the bucho in a small Japanese company. You should pay a bonus. If you're dividing by 12, you're giving a lot away. Your Social Security expenses are about double what they would be on bonus. Straight salary Social Security contributions are about double. You're losing your ability to cut that bonus back to move out a poor performer. And if you have, given that you have the same lump sum retirement benefit in terms of your table at the back of your work rules, your rules of employment, you're going to get beaten with an unduly rich lump sum retirement liability if you're dividing annual income by 12. And if you don't have non-pensionable allowance components and even concepts such as dainikyuyo, okay? Put your money into cash compensation. Bring in the good, move out the bad, pay the good well, and penalize the bad. Now that's kind of a hard line, okay? But your business is hard here, and I have closed up many businesses.
About the Hitachi Zosen plant that you mentioned is closing in Hiroshima Prefecture. I think they laid off 3,000 people or so. What do they have to do